Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at the Hogue Avenger. This is one of a number of interesting attempts that have been made to turn the 1911 into a better, more accurate match pistol. The idea here is, of course, the 1911 has a tremendous amount of market penetration. Everyone's familiar with it. There's a huge amount of aftermarket support, and people are making really good triggers in 1911s. That's like a core gunsmithing competency is, can you make a really good 1911 trigger? A lot of people can do that. And so the next step in accurizing a 1911 becomes, well, how do we get essentially the barrel to be in consistently the exact same position every single time so that the sights and the barrel are in the same relative position so that, well, it's accurate, so that the bullet goes in the same place as where you're aiming it every single time. And this is made a bit difficult by the fact that it is a recoil action, a recoil operated action, because the barrel is going to slide back and tilt down between every shot, and the barrel is held in place by centered by a barrel bushing. And so there's a lot of work in match 1911s that went into how do we accurize the barrel bushing, how do we accurize the barrel, how do we get all of the play and slop out of the system. A number of people, including one Peter Spielberger of Austria, figured, why don't we just replace that tilting barrel recoil operated system completely with a different system that uses a fixed barrel. And so what he did was develop what he calls the Avenger, or called the Avenger here, which is essentially a fixed barrel delayed blowback upper assembly for a 1911 lower. It's a pretty cool system. It's often described as a flapper delayed blowback, which is correct. You might think of it as being roller delayed. It doesn't use a roller, but the physics principles involved are pretty similar to a roller delayed system. Essentially, the barrel is fixed. There is a flap that locks up into a recess in the top of the slide. It's not actually sliding, but in the top of the top part of the gun. And before the bolt can open, it has to push this lever down against an angled surface, overcome a bunch of friction and leverage, and then it can cycle and open. So this was intended to be more accurate than the 1911, as well as faster cycling, lower felt recoil because it has less reciprocating mass. It was supposed to be a really cool system. So let's first dive in, pull this apart, which is gonna be that's a thing, and then we'll talk about what ended up happening to these. Since this is a replacement upper slide assembly for a standard 1911 lower, it uses standard 1911 magazines, and of course, the whole lower assembly is regular 1911. So whatever trigger you have in your 1911 lower is what you'll have for your Avenger. We take a look at the markings here. We have Avenger by Hogue, because this is an American-made one. This actually has an extended barrel in it, a 6-inch barrel instead of the standard 5. We have a fiber optic front sight out there. Avenger by Hogue on the other side as well. Ejection port. Interesting to note that the original patent talked about the possibility of this system having interchangeable ejection directions so that you could have an ejection port on either side and send the casings whichever way you want. That doesn't appear to have actually made it into production. We have a little Hogue logo, Hogue machine and tool logo there. At the back, you've got your hammer, which is connected to the 1911 lower. We got an adjustable rear sight here, and then you have these two little gripping levers that allow you to cycle the slide. I'm going to put the magazine back in here because this will now lock open. Note that the top frame, or the top strap of what used to be a slide, is no longer actually moving. So this has a series of threaded holes in it, and you can mount an optic to this top strap. They also made a piece here, you could put a piece of Picatinny rail on it. So a number of different optics mounting solutions here. You could use irons, or you could have your optic, and your optic is not going to be reciprocating, which means it's not under a lot of G-force. That's something, we've got optics that are very capable of handling slide forces today, but 20 years ago when this was first announced, that was a little bit trickier of a thing. That's when you would tend to see competition 1911s with a scope mount attached to the frame down here, wrapping up over the side of the gun so that the optic didn't move. And the Avenger had a really nice system for allowing that. Well, anyway, there's the barrel. We've got a recoil spring up here, which we'll see in a moment. All the controls are the same, so I can use the slide stop there to drop the slide ejection port here. Worth pointing out that the barrel is actually 0.08 of an inch lower in bore axis than a standard 1911. So that's a part of what's supposed to reduce muzzle flip on this. And of course, because you've got less reciprocating mass here than a 1911 slide, that's also supposed to contribute to less felt recoil and less muzzle climb. Now, the Hogue Avenger came with a series of special tools used to disassemble it, and I don't have any of this. I was loaned this by its owner, and he didn't have the tools either. So we're going to go ahead and do it with some standard tools. This is going to be a bit challenging. The first step is to knock out this pin. They use the slide stop pin here to lock the slide in place, but not quite in the same way as on a regular 1911. So this just has a little spring detent holding it in, which is now holding in my punch. You can see that detent right there. Flip this over. We can pull out the pin. Next up, I need to get this slide stop out of the way. So with this assembly a little bit forward, we can just pull it out like that. And then the slide whole assembly here, the whole Hogue Avenger, just comes right off the top of your standard 1911 frame. The next step is to take off this front barrel shroud, which is done with a socket head screw down inside here. Hogue made, this is where one of the special Hogue tools comes into play. I just have a regular Allen wrench here. All right, and once the screw is all the way out, this just slides right off the front of the gun. There's the recoil spring and the spring bushing, so I can take the bushing out by just gently spreading these two side plates apart. So then there's the bushing. Note that it actually has a hole in it right there for the end of the recoil spring, so it keeps that captive once it's in place. Now I can open this up. There's no more spring pressure on it. The next thing I need to do is take out this piece, but in order to do that, I have to take out this retainer. So on the back of the slide here, we have two pins. This is actually the firing pin. And then this is a spring pin that we have to use to remove some parts. So I have to push that pin in, and then I go in through this hole in the side with a flathead screwdriver. Again, there are special tools that Hogue made for this, and I don't have them. Push that in, and then wedge. There we go. Actually, that worked pretty well on the first try. I want to lift this wedge up, and then I can pop it the rest of the way up, maybe. There we go. So I want to be careful that it doesn't go flying. There we go. All right. So there's that piece removed. Then I have to push this spring-loaded block backwards, which will unhook it from this component. This is another special tool from Hogue, so I'm going to push that back, and now I can take this piece, I can rotate it upward, and then I can lift it out of those two wings. Note that those holes are oval, as are the little mounting lugs, so that you can only put it in this way, and once it's rotated down, it can't come out. Now I can pull this forward, lift off this side plate, set it aside, and now we can actually see how this thing works. So that right there is the locking recess. So when this goes into battery, the bolt assembly here, and you can see, open it back up, you can see we've got our extractor right here. We've got our firing pin protruding through right there. I should have also mentioned there is a feed ramp that is removable. So this acts as your feed ramp there. That comes out. It sits, that lives in that little hole. So when it's in place, you can see it's going to act as a little feed ramp there. Anyway, this is the locking flap right here, and there are two little coil springs pushing it up. When the bolt goes fully into battery, right there, that flap lifts upward into the top of the slide assembly and gets pushed into place. So in order for the bolt to go backward, it has to overcome the resistance of this flap in there being pushed up by those two springs. So I can pull it back fairly easily with the handle here, but in practice, that is your delaying mechanism. It's kind of cool. So you can see that in practice here pretty easily with me pulling it back manually. But the barrel is completely fixed. The barrel's locked into this whole assembly up here. And the barrel is exactly in line with this rail up here. So your sights are always exactly in line with your barrel, no matter how much you shoot it. This never has any parts that get worn and end up with the sights and the barrel out of alignment. Now, in theory, we can disassemble this farther and take all of these small pieces out. That requires yet more use of Hogue's special tools that I still don't have, and the potential of springs flying everywhere. And I think we have a good enough idea of how this actually functions now that I'm just going to leave it. Spielberger's idea was licensed to Hogue for manufacturing here in the United States. They announced it in 2003 at SHOT Show. It was also manufactured in Europe, in Austria specifically, Spielberger's home country, by a company called PowerSpeed. It was announced at IWA in Europe in 2007, and that should give you an idea of where this is going. And this fell victim to much of the same thing that happens to a lot of high-end, small-scale production projects. Namely, it took a very long time to actually put this thing into production. So, announced in 2003, it was available finally by 2010 or 2011. During that time, of course, during the course of delays, there were price increases, there were changes, there was additional expense incurred, and what had originally been advertised as an $800 MSRP item, when it finally came to market from Hogue, was $1,400, if I have the numbers correct. It would eventually go up to $1,600. The short version of this is it just did not sell well. Because it was too expensive, it took too much time. This was a classic vaporware sort of product that did actually get produced, because there are some of them out there, just not very many. And by the time it was actually available, the price was beyond what people were willing to pay. And there are a lot of other options out there on the market. One of them simply being an Accurized 1911. And while this has the potential to be more accurate than an Accurized tilting barrel system, how many people can actually shoot more accurately than their Accurized standard 1911? Not a ton. And a lot of those people are going to, instead of use 1911s, they're going to go to platforms that are from the ground up built more to be precision competition guns, things like Pardinis, for example. So these are pretty darn scarce today, but they're a really cool, interesting system, and we are going to take this one out to the range tomorrow side by side with a nice upgraded 1911 and put it to the test. We'll find out if it's better, worse, or just kind of about the same, and how the recoil claims and the muzzle climb claims actually fare in reality. So stick around for tomorrow's video. Hopefully you enjoyed taking a close look inside the sort of unicorn upper of the Hogue Avenger. Thanks for watching.